By the time I was 17, it had escalated to something completely outside of my control. Like it was hours a day that I would spend watching pornography.
Hey, welcome to the Live Like It's True podcast, where we talk through some of the most astonishing stories in the Bible and how to live like those stories are true. I'm your host, Shannon Popkin, and my hope is that these conversations will inspire you to better know the story, share the story, and live the story. In this True Story of the Beginning series, we're looking at Genesis 1 through 3 and asking, how does the origin story in the front of our Bibles counter or correct the false narratives of the world? And once we're grasping this true story, then we're asking, how can we live like the story is true? As a 13-year-old girl, Jessica innocently stumbled upon the world of pornography. She was lonely, and the porn chat rooms offered love and acceptance. And yet, similar to the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, pornography was not the harmless fruit that Jessica supposed it was. Jessica Harris is a wife, a mom, a Bible teacher, and she's the author of a brand new book with Baker Publishing called Quenched, Discovering God's Abundant Grace for Women Struggling with Pornography and Sexual Shame. In this episode, Jessica and I are walking through her story and looking back at our origin story in Genesis 1 through 3. We're looking at how these false narratives of the world deceived Jessica and the steps she took to break free. It is such a hopeful and truth-filled conversation, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Jessica Harris, welcome to Live Like It's True.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I love your heart to serve the Lord. You are a writer and an international speaker. You talk openly and honestly about pornography addiction among Christian women. We're so grateful for your voice. We're so grateful for you and the ways that you've gotten to share on ABC's Nightline, the 700 Club, Focus on the Family, Crew, all these different amazing places. So we feel really honored to have you here with us to have, an honest conversation about what happens when we fall into sin. And as I was telling you earlier, we have just spent the last several months looking at Genesis 1 through 3, at this origin story. In the very beginning of our Bible, I've heard it called many times called the seedbed for the rest of the Bible. There are so many important parts of this narrative that set the stage for everything that's going to come after. So what I want to do with my time with you is, first, I want to hear your story. You have an amazing story of God rescuing you. So take us back, Jessica, to you at age 13. Tell us what your life was like at that point, and then tell us what happened on that fateful day when you stumbled across some pornography.
Yeah, so I was raised in a Christian home, a Christian family, and we went to church regularly, like multiple times a week. And all of the big tent revivals and the missions conferences, we were there.
Okay.
And we would pray before meals. So God was like a part of our lives, but maybe not a relationship necessarily with him. But when I was 13, I was researching for school. I'm an older millennial, so I was researching for school on dial-up internet, and came across a video of hardcore pornography. So I wasn't looking for it. I never went searching for it. I had no idea what it even was, didn't know it existed. This is back when the internet was relatively new in people's homes, and we didn't understand the dangers of things like this. And this one was hardcore pornography, and it started to throw pop-up windows, pop-up after pop-up, and all of the pop-up windows are pornographic as well. And then eventually, like as I'm trying to click out of them and get all of this to stop, I ended up on a website that was a porn website. We had never talked about sex in my family, and we had never talked about it in church other than to say, don't have it.
Right.
So for me, it was like, oh, this is that thing that people have been talking about. Like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand what they're saying. But for me, I thought, this isn't sex. Like, it doesn't count. Like, this is safe and it's okay for me because I'm not going to get pregnant from this. I'm not going to get an STD from this. So this is okay, this is a perfectly acceptable way for me to express and explore my sexuality. And so I went into it with that mindset because I didn't have a narrative otherwise.
So that first time when you saw this, you didn't feel like it was wrong.
It was traumatic. So what I tell people is like, if you were to walk in on somebody like in bed, you wouldn't be like, fascinating. Like you would have a reaction of like,
Right.
ah,
Yeah.
but
Oh, right.
at the same time, it was like, okay, it's not like I walked in on somebody, like they put it out here. So like
Right.
this is out here for people to view and consume. So, okay. But that turned into curiosity. And so it turned into what is this and what am I looking at? And so it was researching it more, if you will.
Right. So you ended up in a chat room, right? And there were things you didn't understand, you didn't know.
Right. That exposure to pornography led me to the world of like online chat rooms, and you would go into a chat room and someone would ask for a private chat. And I'm like, okay. And so I go in there and then they're asking you to do things. I was like, but I don't understand what they're asking me to do. I'm a young, naive 13, 14-year-old at that point. And so I would be going back to pornography to research whatever this thing is that this person is asking me to do. Pornography was my sex ed teacher in a way.
Oh, that's so hard to hear as a mom. Like I want to protect you from that. I don't want you to have to navigate that on your own. And I'm sad that that happened. Like, what was the progression? Like this didn't all happen immediately, right?
Right. No.
So you stumbled upon it at age 13. And then how did that progress?
Right. It started as more of a curiosity, and then I didn't really have a lot of opportunity to like interact with other people. Like at that point my family was very broken. I was living alone with my mom, and because I'm being raised essentially by a single mom, it was like I don't have a lot of chance for extracurricular activities. I'm not really hanging out with people at school. So this was like my chance to hang out with people was online in these chat rooms where they were asking me to do things. And there was a sense of belonging and feeling loved and even pursued. And then eventually it was like, forget the chat rooms. Like, why am I even doing that anymore? And it was just all pornography usage, not extreme types of pornography. And then by the time I was 17, it had escalated to something completely outside of my control. Like it was hours a day that I would spend watching pornography. I would call my mom when I got home from school, because again, this is still back in the land of dial-up. And I would ask her when she was going to come home from work. She would say 6:00, for instance. And I would go, okay, well, I'm going to be researching for school this afternoon. So like you won't be able to call in, but I love you. And I hope you have a good afternoon at work. Talk to you later. And then I would go into her room because that's where the computer was. And I would just watch pornography until like 5:30 and then would clear the history, because by that point she had caught me once when I was 14 and I love her dearly and she has healed a lot. But at that point she lost her mind and she was like, what is wrong with you? Why, how could you do this? I never had desires like this until after I was married. Please tell me you were just curious and you're never going to do it again. So I said, sure, I'm just curious and I'll never do it again. But I lied. So I knew enough to clear the internet history, and then I would type in websites that would look like I had been researching for school. So if she checked, it was all good websites and it wasn't a cleared history, because I knew that would be suspicious too. So I just it had gone from this thing where I'm kind of doing it out of curiosity to this thing that I am protecting. I'm lying about it. I'm covering my tracks for it. And I'm rearranging my entire life to be able to do this as much as absolutely possible. So even at school, I was pulling up erotica, which is just written out stories on the school computers, and reading them. I'm a 4.0 student at that point. No one's going to come and question what I'm reading. Everyone's going to just assume that I'm working on schoolwork. So it was like any moment that I had that I wasn't actively doing schoolwork or eating or sleeping, I was trying to find a way to consume pornography. And that started to affect my grades. It started to affect my sleep, because I would stay up all night and then only get a couple hours of sleep in the morning. And that's when I was like, okay, let's go ahead and I need to get this back in its box. Because I still felt like there's nothing wrong with this. Like this is better than the alternative, which is to go sleep around with people. So I tried to put it back in its box and realized that I couldn't stop, like I couldn't control it.
So let's go back though early on. You said you felt loved, you felt accepted, you felt like you were wanted there.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a craving in your heart. And I don't think we would say those are wrong cravings to be
Right.
loved and accepted, to be wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And you were ripe for this disaster because there was a loneliness, there was an emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see about that in the story of Genesis, where Eve, I mean, she's completely content.
Right.
She has everything she needs. And yet this forbidden fruit is appealing to her in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's a curiosity too. She wants to know, it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
She wants to know something. And so like, I kind of see that in what parallels do you see between what happened to you and what happened to Eve?
Yeah. So I think that the big one that I see when I read through this story and Eve's being tempted, and I'm sure people have heard this connected to lust before. Like she looks at the tree and she sees that it's good for food. But I thought when I read that, I thought, but so is every other tree in the garden. It's not like that's the only tree that she can get food from. And then what was interesting to me is it's not good for food. Like it's not good for food because what does food do? It nourishes and it gives life. And God has told her, or God has told Adam at least, that this tree will bring death. So this tree is not good for food. It would be like if we knew a plant was poisonous, like just because it looks like the other plant that's good to eat doesn't mean like if we know it's poisonous, for us to go, well, it looks like I could eat it would be foolish. Like we understand that that's dangerous and it's not good for us to eat. And I feel like that is what it was like for my story. Like, well, this is safe and this is good. And this is a healthy way for me to express this. This will give life. And this is a good exploration. This is good for food. And no, it's not. It was not. But at the time, it wasn't like someone had told me not to do it at that point. So I didn't really have that reference point. But it was still interesting to me. Like God wants Adam and Eve to be fed, or he's not expecting them to starve to death, but he has provided for them an entire garden full of options. And he has said, this tree in this garden brings death. Everything else you can enjoy and it brings life, but this tree will bring death. And what is Eve's first decision, kind of like her first observation as she's making this choice? It's, well, this tree is good for food. No, it is not. And so that's almost like the first way that she questions God, even though God has said this is the eternal outcome of this choice. She's going, but temporarily it could taste really, really good. And I think that's kind of the lie of pornography and other sins that we struggle with. Temporarily, it can taste really, really good. But long term, it's death.
Oh, that's so true. She's deciding for herself rather than letting God decide what is good for her and what is bad for her. He's already said, this is death to you. But she's saying it looks good for food. It looks like it will nourish me. And then look at how that first bite was like a gateway to the whole corruption of the whole world, every sin imaginable. And then maybe some similarities with what you experienced. This was a gateway, there was a progression. Sin encroached, it took over your life. It didn't happen all in a moment, but it did begin with saying, I think this will nourish me. I think this is going to be good for me, as opposed to sleeping with my boyfriend, this is good. Like me deciding this is good. And I have heard many people make that argument about pornography, that it's a great option because it's not hurting anyone. I mean, it's so interesting that teen pregnancies have plummeted. I don't think kids are sleeping around as much. It's interesting, right? The stats are interesting, but the pornography stats are astounding.
Well, and I think there is an element of just like changing out. So you definitely have your hookup culture that's still alive and well.
Sure.
And I think people with the increase of like understanding how all of this works and knowing how to prevent unwanted pregnancies and things like that. But you definitely have your element of young people who are just choosing to entertain with pixels as opposed to actual people, because there's an element of sexual intimacy that is intimate, right? And so
Right.
you have a generation of one of the hallmarks of Gen Z. They have many great qualities, and I mean, we just saw that with what happened at Asbury. So they're
Right.
not like a generation that we just throw off and discard,
No, right.
but they value online relationships to almost the exact same degree that they value in-person ones. So there's not as much of a distinction in their minds between the person I see face to face and the people that I see online. They're valued almost essentially the same. So when you have that and you couple that with pornography, you're going, I'm getting all the benefits of sexual pleasure without any of the dealing with people. Like, I don't have to deal with people. You'll have teens in relationships where maybe she's not comfortable sleeping with him, but he'll pressure her and pressure and pressure her to give him nude pictures because, if you love me, you'll do this. And so you see kind of porn rewriting this narrative and making it sex even less personal and less intimate, and making it more about my pleasure and the quickest route to my pleasure, whether or not that involves another person that I'm with. And so I do think you have more and more young people who aren't sleeping around more because they aren't interested in all the baggage that can come with that, and they're choosing other options.
They're being pragmatic, sadly pragmatic, right? Relationships are messy. They're a lot of work. And yet it's the good fruit that God has given us. Like he wants us to be nourished. He wants us to have like the whole garden is ours, right? Just stay away from the forbidden fruit. Enjoy marriage, enjoy intimacy, enjoy a life on life relationship, but enjoy it in a wholesome, good way that God has designed it. But it's a lot more work, it's a lot. It's a lot more uphill because of the fall. But okay, so take me to, like, you talked about how you were opening, all of these windows, and then you were erasing your history, you were arranging your life. It progressed into shame. Like the way you described it at first, I wouldn't even have imagined that you would feel a lot of shame.
Right.
Because, it was just, you were saying like, well, it's consumable. Other people have made it available. What's the problem? There wasn't a lot of education about it. There wasn't, the stigma probably that teens today would definitely have know more about the stigma of it. But it did progress into shame, and you're there's a lot of effort going on in covering your tracks. And what parallels do you see in that part of your story with what happens in Genesis 3?
No, that's a really great question. For my story, I feel like shame really entered when I tried to get help, or when I looked for help. Like, I'm going to put this back in a box. And then I realized I couldn't. So then I looked for help to see how I could put it back in a box. And there was nothing out there for women. And that was the first time that I thought, oh, am I the only person in the world who has done this? And then that triggered this, oh dear, what have I done? I have messed up so bad. I'm never getting out of this. Before that, it was kind of just like keeping my mom happy.
Well, and talk to us about the shame that you experienced when you talked with when your mom caught you the first time. Like that was almost a shaming, right? I mean, there was
it was, and I again, this is back in the day. I'm trying to give my mom so much grace. Like I always hate when people are. I mean, I'm a mom now, and I always think about, what is my kid going to say about me when she's like 18? All the ways I've messed up.
If your mom's listening, we love you. We get it. It's raising teenagers. I have raised 3, and I mean, they have a lot of stories. My first book was called Control Girl. So if you can only imagine all of the ugly stories about me as mom, but go ahead.
So it was more of an embarrassment, I think, for me when my mom when she caught me, and she was like, obviously she knew it was me and it couldn't be my brothers, because I think that was her first, like, it's got to be your brothers, but they didn't live there. So,
Yeah.
and then it was like, Jessica, why? Like, why? Just explain why. Just tell me why. And so I tell parents, like, don't give your kid the out, because she did. She said, just tell me that you're just curious and you'll never do it again. And I said, okay, then I'm just curious and I'll never do it again. Like, I'm going to tell you whatever I need to tell you to get you to stop writing me right now. Whatever. I don't want you to be mad. I don't want you to be yelling at me. I don't like what's happening. This is uncomfortable and I'm embarrassed and I'm confused. I was very confused because I'm dealing with, we've never talked about this in my family at all. There was never a conversation about what could be wrong with this or why this wasn't a healthy way to explore your sexuality. Because again, this is back in the beginning of the internet, and people didn't even realize that this kind of content was out there. So there weren't narratives and tools for parents to be able to have these conversations with their kids. And so here's my mom with like 14-year-old me, and she's grasping at straws kind of, and just doesn't know what to do. Because I mean, if there's no resources for women, there's definitely no resources for parents whose daughters are struggling with this. So she just, in that desperation, we always, when we're looking for hope, we get desperate and we just want something, just give me anything to hang on to. And she just said, just tell me that you'll never do it again. Just tell me that you were just curious. Okay, I was just curious. I'll just tell you that. But then what it told me was, okay, mom can't know about this. Like, it still could be totally safe, but mom just can't know. Mom doesn't understand. I mean, how many teenagers have saed that, right? Like, you just don't get it, mom.
No, my kids said that to me regularly. You don't understand. We don't need, like, we'll just keep, they wanted to keep their experiences to themselves because they didn't think I could handle it. Right. I'm like, look, I have, engaged the world. I understand they just thought I was very sheltered and naive. And I'm like, well,
you wouldn't get it, mom.
You are not equipped to handle it on your own. And I love that in our story in Genesis 3, God came after them. He didn't, he knew they were not equipped to handle this shame on their own. He came looking for them with these gentle questions. He didn't, in my conversation with Nicole Furno, we talked about how he didn't come stomping through the garden like, Adam, where are you? Like, no, gentle questions. He invited confession. He wanted to talk to them about it. It's beautiful. Okay, Jessica, if you could be the mom who is encountering a teenager, first time you've discovered porn on their phone or in their hand, even, what would be a great response to have ready to go?
I tell parents all the time that if you don't know what to say, ask them to tell you their story. And I know that's like, as a mom, it seems like, of course I know their story. I've been there since day one, but you don't know it from their perspective and you don't know their experience. And so if you are a parent who has found out that your daughter is watching this stuff or is sending images of herself to somebody else, I think that conversation needs to be one that's marked by love and grace and a sense of safety. Like you're talking about, God doesn't come stomping through the garden, blowing down trees, trying to find, where Adam and Eve are, ripping off their fig leaves, he doesn't do any of that. And so I think as parents, speaking as one who has 2 little girls right now, but we want to be that model of that safe place for reconciliation. The gospel is all about reconciliation. Shame is all about driving us away and isolating. And the gospel has always, from Genesis 3 all the way through, always been about a God wanting to reconcile to himself.
Yeah, I love that idea of tell me your story. Tell me about what led you here. And that's what we see God doing. His first question is, where are you? Yeah. He's looking for them. And then, they get to the place, well, I was naked, so I hid. Well, who told you that you were naked? Where did this start? Did you eat from that tree? So like, tell me your story. Tell me your experience from your perspective so we can unpack it together. Yes. Like, that seems like godly parenting. Like, tell me more. And let's sort this out together versus in isolation and shame. Right.
Yeah. And I get it. Cause like as a parent, obviously, like I want to protect my kids from this. And the moment I find out that they found it, I'm going to feel like a failure. And we can kind of
Yeah.
bring that into this. But like, here's my question. Is God a failure? Like, because the people that he created went
Yeah.
off the rails and like, did their own thing.
Yeah.
And what was his heart? It wasn't, you guys have made a fool of me, or you guys have completely let me down, or didn't you, like, why can't you listen to what I say to you? It is, okay, let's make a road back, because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it's not about you as the parents either. It's about what sin is doing to your child. And so it's about wanting to repair that road back to God. And we get to be that ambassador as parents. We get to model that for our kids. Like if they don't see that kind of love and response from us, they're never going to believe that it can come from God either.
Oh, it's so true. And, the only ones in the story who are blaming and shaming, that's like, the enemy is, there's his impact there, but they're blaming each other. They're pointing fingers. That's not what God does. That's not what he's doing in the story. He is, Genesis 3:15 is the first mention of the gospel. He has a plan for that, for the return, which we're still waiting for that complete reconciliation, but it's put into motion here. But okay, so go forward then to when you're trying to put it back in a box. Like you, and what's interesting to me about that, Jessica, is when I wrote Control Girl, the impetus for that book was my struggles with control and recognizing that Eve reached out. When she reached out for that fruit, she reached for control. She didn't want God being her God. She wanted to be
God for herself.
Yeah, she wanted to decide what was good for her and what was right for her. And then her consequence in Genesis 3:16, it's a consequence of control. Your desire will be now to control your husband. And my experience with control is that I want it, and yet I am controlled by my desire for control. And so that's our relationship with sin. We want what we want. We want to decide for ourselves, but then it ends up owning us. Right. And that's the progression that I kind of hear in your story. Yep. So you're trying to put it back in the box. You're like, okay, this is enough. I'm like, it's now calling the shots for me. And so tell us about trying to reach out for help.
Yeah. So I felt like, okay, I call it my little pet, like lizard that I like brought home one day. Like, there's nothing wrong with this. And then like it turned into a dragon.
Yeah.
Like, that's just what it felt like. And it's like, no, back. Like, I want to be in control of this. Like you're saying, like, this is my hobby. This is my pleasure that I am wanting to do. And if I don't want to do it today, I want to be able to say no. Like you don't get to tell me what to do. But I was finding that I could not. I would get up in the morning and go, okay, not today, not today, not today, not today. And it just felt like my body was like, we're doing it today, and I would go into like autopilot, it felt like, and I would be, and then I thought, okay, like maybe just a couple hours, and I would like set a timer for myself. Even I would give myself a limit. And when that didn't work, it was like, what is wrong with me? Okay, well then I'll resort to the only thing that I know, which is to punish myself. So I resorted to self-harm at a point, thinking if I can just like get my body to understand that there's a consequence for this, like maybe that will shape and change this. And then I'll finally be able to stop. And none of those things worked. None of them worked. So I went off to college thinking I need to get help, but I am absolutely terrified because I don't know where is safe to ask for help. My church did not feel safe because we never talked about it. And it's a bunch of older men on staff. And it's like, which wife do I want to give a heart attack? Because I'm going to, I'm going to share that this is my story. And like the part of shame and like the whole, like almost like fig leaves, like you're covering yourself up. I worked so hard to be the good Christian girl and to present this image that was so opposite of what I was struggling with. Like I wanted this to be the last thing that people would think that I would ever do. And so I was actively involved in my church. I was singing in talent competitions. I was doing Bible memory verses. Like I was your quintessential star student and star youth group person. Like I did that on purpose because it was like, I am trying to outrun the shame that I have from this struggle. And so I was afraid to tell anybody in my church, because then that means I'm telling you that I've been lying this whole time. And so that's
Mm.
terrifying. So I wanted to go off to college and get caught there. And then I figured, okay, they'll be able to help me because this is a college. They've seen this before and they know how to help people like me. And I did get caught at college and they looked at me and they said, we know this wasn't you. Women don't have this problem.
Mm.
And so that was just like a crushing boulder of shame. Like it was a crushing weight of shame of going, wow, what is wrong with me? Because now I just feel like I've gotten confirmation that I'm the only woman in the world who has managed to mess this up. And an interesting thing is in the process of trying to work through what they had told me, I actually found a video from, I don't know who, probably a church that said the sin of pornography is greater than the sin of Adam and Eve. And I remember thinking, I have messed up so bad that there is no way God could love me. Like that's what this is saying. This video, which was a lie, was saying that what I had done was the worst possible sin. And I am the only woman in the world who's done this. Like, what is wrong with me? And so that just buried me in shame. It was crushing, absolutely crushing.
Talk to me about what the enemy was doing in your life. And we're, we see him in this story where he's the one pointing to the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we don't see him shaming them, but we know that he's the father of lies. He's a murderous, he's been murderous from the beginning. He wanted death for them. And he wants the same thing for you. He is your adversary. He wanted you to die. He wants to bring death, day by day death. He wants you to be consumed with the sin. He wants for the shame. What do you see though? I mean, I'm kind of supposing that these are the things you saw in your story. What insights do you have?
I think for me, the big one was kind of, I feel like in Genesis 3, the serpent always has like partial truths. Like he's always hiding the long term. Like God said, this tree would bring death. You won't die. You'll know good and evil. Well, yes, of course, like you'll do that, but you will also die. Like you're leaving out a very important piece of information here.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was, especially in that particular point in my story, I gave up and I said, okay, well then if I can't be the good Christian girl who used to be addicted to porn, then I'll just have to be the porn star who used to be a Christian. Like it was like, if you want this freedom that you just want to be free from all of the lies and all the stuff, then it was this feeling of almost like you're mine, like I'm taking you. And that's how I felt probably for the next year or so, of just like, God can't love me. He can't reach me where I am. And I feel like Adam and Eve, their response is that, like, you're right. The devil never told them that we know of. He gives his little half truths and then he slithers away. And they react by hiding from each other, covering up with fig leaves, and then going the extra mile and trying to hide from God too, because there's this sense of, wow, we've really messed this up so much that we don't even want God to see what's going on here. And we're going to hide and we're going to distance ourselves from him.
I love that. And one of the most important things I feel like I learned in studying Genesis 1-3 so carefully this year is the part where God is speaking, to the serpent. So the Lord said to the serpent, because you've done this, he kind of sends him to his knees. And I had an amazing conversation with Portia Collins. And we looked at Genesis 3:15. I will put hostility between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. And so what I see God doing there is like, okay, you sided with this serpent. Basically, Courtney Doctor, that's the way she put it. And I think it was brilliant. You sided with this serpent. You decided decided to ally with the serpent and believe him over God's word. So it's like, if you're going to draw the line, God's over here and you've sided with the serpent, but look what God just did. He put the serpent as their enemy on the other side of the line, and God puts them back on his side. Like he sides with them. And he, because it says, I will put hostility between you and the woman. Like there's this divider. The serpent is the adversary. God is our ally. He chooses to be our ally. He chooses to be our rescuer. And so, us hiding from God, like that's what Adam and Eve naturally did. That's what you're doing at this point of your story. You're like, if I can't be on God's side, well, I'm just gonna have to go over on this other side and make the best of it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, no, there is no human being, because we bear the image of God. No human being is one that God will ever turn his back on and say, well, no, not you.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of us is welcomed back to be an ally of God, right?
Yep. Yep. And that's one of the things when I was reading through this, I thought, God, and we talked about this earlier, but God still pursues them. Like he never loses sight of the long game and the end game, which is reconciliation. And you're talking about how God brings us kind of like, he redraws the line, right? He's like, no, you're not on that team. That is like how I started to battle shame. So a year after I had gone through this horrible shaming experience at this college, I was at a different Bible college, and they had a women's meeting and said, hey, we know some of you struggle with the strongholds. They talked about strongholds, and strongholds are areas of your life where the devil still kind of has a foothold. And they're like, you're living for God in all the other areas, but this one, you're like, well, I'll just keep that one. It's just a little castle, no big deal. And they said, it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And you're giving refuge to the enemy, essentially.
Right.
And they said, so we want you guys to share this. We know some of you struggle with pornography, and we want to help you.
Wow.
And so I wrote that down. I wrote down that my name was Jessica Harris and I struggled with pornography, and I turned it into the dean's staff. And I remember walking away feeling so still crushed by shame and feeling so afraid that this was it. Like this, mm-hmm. I had just confessed. And so it's like, God, this has to work, because if I confess and there's no help and there's no hope, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like I have just sent out my last lifeline. This is it. But at the same time, it just felt like I had shame screaming in my ear, like, you are mine and you are never going to be free. And you don't know what you've just done. You just ruined your life. Like, how could you tell them this? And
well, you're working so hard to maintain
an image.
A state of innocence, like just like Adam and Eve, you're yes. It's not me. It's not,
it's not like me. This isn't... And then I'm going, it is me.
Right. And, I just want to read this verse, Jessica, because this is what it reminds me of. This is 1 Peter 5:6. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time. That's what you did when you wrote on that slip of paper, casting all your cares on him because he cares about you. Be sober-minded, be alert. Your adversary, the devil is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. Like that's what the enemy is trying to do in your life. He's trying to devour your whole life. I love this verse though. Verse 9, resist him, firm in the faith, knowing that the same kind of sufferings are being experienced by your fellow believers throughout the world. You know what that says to me? You are not alone.
Right.
In your battle with sin, you are not alone. And I mean, for the listener right now who maybe found this because there was pornography in the title, I just want you to know you are not alone in this battle, in this struggle. And it would be your enemy who he's trying to pry his way into your life and convince you of lies, absolute lies. You are not alone. And you can, the moment that you can choose this way out, but involves humility, humbling yourself under the mighty hand of God, and being alert to this enemy who wants to devour you. Does that fit what you experienced that day?
It does. So after I wrote that down and I went back to my dorm room, just feeling like, oh goodness, I need to pack my bag because I'm going home. The dean staff came to the room and they said, Jessica, what you wrote on that slip was brave and we want to help you. And I tell people it was like in that moment, I recognized all of the lies, because is he not the father of lies? All of the lies that I had been told that had kept me captive for years. And I finally had this feeling of, you've been lying to me. And what else have you been lying about? Yeah. And so there was almost like this, you're talking about that line drawn. It was like, oh, you're not my friend. You're not protecting me. Like you're not, I'm not okay with this. And there was this welcoming almost of grace, of this feeling of, wow, God is pursuing and he does want that reconciliation. And I'm going to chase after that now. Like I'm going to choose that
Yeah.
now.
And what I hear is like, you've been a believer through this whole struggle, right?
I had been raised in the church. I've been a Christian, like as far as church going. I would say that my faith became my own when I was 17, actually. So after that senior year of high school, I just realized like, I don't think this faith that I've had is like genuine and actually mine. And so then the verse that brought me to the Lord at that point was God commends his love towards us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And I thought, man, this whole time in my whole life, I've always been like trying to earn God's affection and prove myself to him. And here he is saying, like, listen, you can't. And while you were enemies and while you were doing absolutely everything against me, I still loved you and I still came for you. And so I came to know Christ, I feel like, or I came to own that faith personally when I was 17, before I ever went off to college, which is why that first conversation was so detrimental to me. Because here I am just months into this renewed faith of like, God does love me and he loves me even when I'm doing wrong things. And he's like chasing after me and he's pursuing me. And then I get met with this brick wall of, you've sinned worse than anything else. And so it was like this even more detrimental and more shameful for me, it seemed.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
While you're choosing life, you're choosing this personal relationship with God. But look at how the enemy, I mean, he's strategic. He looks for those moments, right?
Yes.
When we're taking a step in the right direction. And that's when he like just
pounces.
Yes, pounces with shame. There's an avalanche of shame. And like that's Adam and Eve, like that's what we see there. Immediately they're hiding with these fig leaves. They're trying to, they've never hidden from God. They've always enjoyed his presence. And so we can study this passage knowing that our enemy is evil. He is murderous. He wants to destroy our lives. He is not a neighborly sort of fella, who just stopped by the Garden of Eden to, offer some great tips for the, culinary options, right? He is a murderer. He wants to destroy our lives. And we have to be aware of the battle, I think, that's going on, and how sin is part of that. So, let's go back though to your like what, a college sophomore, maybe, when you wrote on
second year.
Second year. So you wrote on a little slip of paper. They call you brave. I love, because it's so true. Isn't it brave for us to confess our sin? Like that's us choosing, I'm going to choose God as my ally because he's the only one who can do anything about my sin. Like we see that from Genesis 3 to the end of the book. He's the only one who can rescue me from this sin. But so, you've made your choice. You've revealed this horrific thing. And now you're like, oh, you've been lying to me. Your eyes are open to what's actually been going on. And I think I always encourage when I speak on the topic, especially of comparison. I just see the enemy's fingers in comparison and control, in all of our different sinful areas, but I think he's very deceptive. And I want for you to be angry. I want for you to see him prowling around your locker at age 13 years old, trying to tempt you into sinful patterns that you will be dealing with when you are my age, 51 years old. Like, I want you to get angry. And because I think that there is something that it opens our eyes when we recognize, like, I mean, wouldn't you, Jessica, if you had a stalker who was like trying to learn everything about you and strategize to bring your destruction, to hurt everyone you love, to murder you, like, would you not want to know that
and I
attack,
would not be okay with this.
Right. You would not, you don't want to just be like, oh, shrugging about, and I get it. I don't want us to spend all of our focus on the enemy, but I certainly want us to know about it. And I love that you got angry at him. And so you were choosing, okay, I'm not going to be blinded by this any longer. And then what happened next?
So then I had to, I started a weekly meeting with one of the members of Dean's staff. I had to do this workbook this workbook was 8.5 by 11. It was huge and thick, and it was bright blue on the cover. it was just ugly. It was so obnoxious. And I remember shame just like, you might say like, I'm done with shame, but shame just kind of like follows you around. Right. So I remember going to the bookstore and needing to buy this book and just being terrified of buying this book because yes, I had shared it, but I had shared it with like one person. I hadn't shared it with everybody. I didn't want everybody to know. And so I bought like 6 other books at the same time, just hoping that that they would just think that I was very interested.
Did everybody know about this book or something, this blue book or what?
They told me to go get it. Like it was part of the program. So like it was part of their material to work through this problem. It was a workbook for men though. So that obviously adds to the.
So did it have pornography in the title or something?
It was like breaking free from pornography, basically. So I just put it in with all the other books and was like, please don't think badly of me. Like I had the person ring them all up. And I remember seeing that book in someone else's bag, one of my classmates' bag, and just thinking, oh, her too? Like she struggles too. But so I worked through that book with one of the dean's staff, and it was a really good like Christian workbook. So it talks about like how we look for our desires to be filled in things that aren't of God and how we can reshape those and have God reshape those desires. And then at the same time, I had a team of women who came around me and kind of answered the question of, who is Jessica without this in her life? Like it's so important, I think, when we're trying to get people to stop behavior, that we understand that there are sometimes driving factors to that. And if you don't get the gospel and grace down into those driving factors, if you don't get Jesus down into the hurts and the pains and the desires that are fueling this, then what you will find is the devil will just bring a new fruit. Kind of like he'll just, okay, fine, you don't want that one anymore. Here's the different thing to struggle with. And so these women were, I think, really instrumental in my freedom because they came around me and they said, okay, for instance, I was not able to cope well with emotions. I'm a very emotional person to begin with, but pornography had become kind of my coping mechanism and my numbing mechanism. So anytime I was angry or sad or even happy, like I would go to that. And so without that, how do I deal with these things? Well, I had no idea. So I would fly off the handle or I would be super dramatic. And these women were so wise, and they would come in and say, okay, you need to learn how to like have a rest in Christ. And it's like, they would work through things like that with me that weren't like, we're getting rid of pornography in your life. You know, they were working through like, how do we build up who you are and your identity in Christ? And so I walked through this journey with this team for like 2 years before I really feel like I could say, yes, I finally broke free of the chains and finally felt like I had freedom. But it was a long process that involved all of those things, not just stop it, but like, but how do we get you back to where God wants you to be? Like, how do we rebuild who God wants you to be in him?
Well, or I would say, how do you live like it's true? You know, how do you live like the true story is the true story, right? How do you align yourself? So like, which false narratives of the world were you rooting out of your thinking then? I love what you shared about your emotions. That like, this isn't the correct way. Like you're actually numbing or whatever with your emotions, but what other, lies or things was God rooting out of your heart at that point?
There was a lot of kind of my identity was a lot of my body and what I needed to offer people. So ever since I was little, even before pornography, I had struggled with this like perfectionism and needing to be perfect for other people. So it was definitely like a people pleasing, like pride, I guess you could say, but just feeling like I had to earn approval from other people. And so pornography started that way, like those chat rooms, that's how it started. It was like, I need the approval of these strange people that I don't even know, which doesn't make sense when you're my age looking back on it, but it made a whole lot of sense when I was 13. But getting their approval and feeling like I had to earn things, and that love and relationships were volatile and based on what I brought to them. And that's not our relationship with God. We bring him nothing.
Yeah.
Right? We bring nothing but messed up brokenness to our relationship with God. And he still loves us and he still comes after us. So learning to find, like, I don't have to prove myself to God. Like, he's not impressed by how many verses I've memorized in the Bible. Like he wants a relationship with me. And so learning what relationship with God truly looks like. And then it's not your checklist of, did you go to church this day? Did you read your Bible for this long? Did you pray for this long? Like, what does the relationship with God look like? What does a healthy relationship with other people look like? What does a healthy Christian community look like? Because I had never really been a part of a healthy community. What does it look like to confess your sins to other people? Like to be accountable to other people, to let down those walls of shame and pride and the need for self-preservation, and to trust other people. And I had to deal a lot with anger just from different pain in my life. And so there was a lot that had to be worked through, I feel, but a lot of it stemmed from feeling like I don't have to earn God's love anymore. Like he loves me and he's walking this journey with me. He's not sitting back there going, "Oh, Jessica, you messed up again." Like, he wants my freedom. He doesn't want my perfection. He wants my freedom, and he wants my relationship with him.
Yes. Yeah. The story does not go, God stomps through the garden. He says, you guys clean yourself up. And when you can figure this out and get this enemy out of this garden and get it cleaned up, then I will come back here. And, if you're good enough, I will be your father again. No, the whole story is about God reconciling them back to himself. God, every single part of our salvation has been accomplished by God. And all we have to do is, like you're saying, come walk with him. Come enjoy his presence. Come accept what he has done for us, and live like that's the truth, right? We're no longer slaves. We're no longer on that other side of the enemy. If we've come to Christ, it's a permanent decision. We belong to him forever and ever, eternally. How can we live like that's true? So today, you are now an author, speaker, Bible teacher, investing in other women who struggle. You have a brand new book called Quenched, and it is not a bright blue cover. I have to say, it's a very lovely cover.
I'm very happy with the cover. Yes.
Yeah. So, but tell us, just to give us a snapshot of what you're doing now and about this book, how you're using it to serve.
Yeah. So in 2009, I started sharing my story, and that was not like a willing choice. I really felt like none of the other doors in my life were opening the way I wanted them to. And so I was like, God, what on earth are you wanting me to do right now? Because this is frustrating for a perfectionist valedictorian in my high school who doesn't have her college degree yet. Like, come on. And it was kind of like, well, I want you to share your story. And I'm telling you, shame just doesn't run away. Like, shame does not run away when you love Jesus. Like, it creeps around and it tries to follow you everywhere. And I thought, no, I am not sharing my story, because no, like that's the last thing that I want anyone to know about me. Like, I want to put it away and just pretend it never happened, and we're going to move on with life, please and thank you.
So before it was like you wanted to keep it in a box of shame under the, hidden, but now you're living this righteous life and you want to keep it in a box in your past, right?
Just I want to keep it like in an attic somewhere.
Like that's my old life. Like, I don't need to.
Exactly. So, I fought that for a while, and I kind of finally put up my website. It was like an anonymous blog, and I was just angry at God. Like, this is so stupid. I don't know why you're wanting me to do this. This is dumb. Like, there's not that many women who struggle, because this is still, again, we don't have resources at this time for women who struggle. There's not a lot of statistics on it. And I had seen a couple women who had the corner of a book, in their bags. Like, I had no concept of the number of women who were struggling. And so started it in 2009. In 2010, I was speaking so someone asked me to come speak, and I was like, well, it can't be anonymous anymore, because you can't be an anonymous speaker. So I went and spoke on lust at a college conference, and shared part of my story, and that whole idea of like turning around and looking at shame and saying, like, you're a liar, like the devil, you're a liar, and you've been lying to me. That whole idea of being held captive by a lust. And the workshop completely sold out. And by the time I got to the room, there was women sitting on the floor, women standing around the edge of the room, and women filling the chairs. And I was like, listen, I am not Beth Moore. Like, I'm not Ann Boskamp. Like, I am nobody. Like, they don't know my name. God, why on earth are all these people here? And it was like, they're here because they're wanting that same message of freedom. They're needing that. And after I shared, that God just moved so mightily in that room, and women were sharing their struggles with not just pornography, but with things like eating disorders and other things that we can just hide so much in shame. And I remember walking out of that room being so overwhelmed, and God it just felt like God said, listen, you can go and have the life that you want. You can go and do whatever you like. I call it my Esther moment, because it was like, sure, you can save yourself. Go ahead, hide who you are. Because what does Esther do? She doesn't want to reveal that she's a Jew, because she doesn't want to get like wrapped into this. And it was like, he said, you can hide who you are. Go ahead, hide it. Go do whatever you want. I will bring deliverance from somewhere else. Because that's what Mordecai says to Esther. Like he says, like, you can go and try to hide and pretend that you're not a Jew. God is going to save us some way.
Come, from
and
somewhere.
You will not be spared. Like we'll be safe. You won't. And it just felt like, sure, Jessica, go ahead and hide this and do whatever life you want. I am going to free these women, and you can be a part of that, or you can kind of fade into oblivion almost. Like you can just pretend like this was never your thing and miss out on what I'm wanting to do. And it was like, how can I, knowing the depths that I went in shame and how suffocating and destructive those lies were, how can I, knowing that there's a way out and knowing how to get out, how can I walk away from these women and leave them alone? I couldn't. And so I started writing more, and then I shared my whole story in a book in 2016, and then got to travel around and speak. And then obviously COVID happened. So then the whole speaking train kind of slowed down a little bit, but and then God is so good, and he is so faithful, and shame is such a liar. I wrote my book in 2016, my first book, Beggar's Daughter, and was so afraid to publish it, because I thought, now everyone's going to know. Now it's a book, like a blog I can take down, book I can't take down. And now everyone's going to know. And I thought, I'm never going to get married. I am never going to be able to have the life that I hoped for and prayed for. Like, no man's ever going to love me because of this struggle that I've had in my past. And it was crazy, because the last thing I wanted anyone to know about me was becoming the first thing that everyone was going to know.
Right.
And I was like, I am so much more. Any of us are so much more than whatever struggles that we have. We bring so much more to the table in human relationships than the struggles that we are going through. And so I remember just being so heartbroken writing this book, like, God, this is my sacrifice, kind of like, I am sacrificing the rest of my life to be able to write this book. And it just seems so dumb. And that's actually how I met my husband. So my husband bought the book, read the book, and realized that we lived close to each other. And so he reached out to me and wanted to get to know me more. And the next year we were married, and he has been the biggest champion of this ministry. He has no shame. Like he's not ashamed for me to be his wife. Because I think some guys that might be like, okay, like, keep it down, like, don't talk about that,
right.
He's not. He took my new book, he prayed that book into existence. I feel when I was going, listen, I'm a mom now, like, the train has passed, the ship has sailed, like, we are done, like, I've done this for a long time for someone else to do it, he would pray for the book every night, like, God, give her another book, one that's traditionally published, like, give this message that platform. And here we are. And he has just been such a great evidence of God's grace. And I tell him that often, like, he is one of the greatest graces in my life. And so I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled about the book. Quenched is the one book. If I could write one book, like, that's the book that I would want to write, to help women combat the shame that can come with this struggle, and to understand that God's heart is always pursuing them. It's for them. It's not wanting them to get their act together and then come back and try again, but it is for them. It is a heart of love that wants to help bring healing and wholeness. So it's really neat. I still run my blog, and I'm developing resources and stuff. There's actually a study guide for Quenched on the blog, but
wonderful. Yeah. Tell us where we can find it.
beggarsdaughter.com.
Okay. Beggar's Daughter. Well, Jessica, thank you so much
Yeah.
for choosing to, not just be anonymous and fade into the background, for choosing first to speak to that room full of women who needed the message and continuing wherever God has given you opportunity. Yes, there is a cost to serving the Lord in this way. But we're so grateful for your willingness to be open and share your life, and for your great message of how you live like it's true. It's been a joy to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for this True Story of the Beginning series. I hope you'll take some time alone with God and with your Bible open to Genesis 1-3. Drink in the true story for yourself, this true story that you're in. Let it reframe your story with the truth. To help you work through this narrative, I've put some tools together for you in my free Live Like It's True workbook. The workbook is particularly designed to help you work through the narratives or the stories in the Bible. It'll help you sort through how the true story of Genesis 1-3 refutes the false narratives in the world. You can find a link for your free workbook in the show notes, along with links to some of the various other resources we've been mentioning and recommending. Many of these resources are actually written by our guests in this season, including Nancy Guthrie, Mary Cassian, Courtney Doctor, and more. Are you enjoying this podcast? If so, would you be willing to rate and review? This helps us widen our reach and helps us to serve others as they're able to find the show. Also, if you have questions or ideas for me, I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much to my producer, Maria Lyons, and my son, Cade Popkin, for providing all of the music that you hear here on the show. And thanks most of all to you for tuning in. It is my joy and privilege to serve you. And now it's time to go live like it's true.